Enslavement, a tragic chapter in human history, has manifested in various forms across different regions and periods. Among the most infamous iterations are those witnessed in North and South America, particularly during the era of the transatlantic slave trade, and in Africa, where slavery existed prior to and alongside the Atlantic trade. Understanding the differences between these systems of enslavement is crucial for comprehending their impacts on societies, cultures, and individuals. In this exploration, we delve into the 5 differences between enslavement in North and South America compared to its manifestations in Africa. While all forms of slavery are characterized by exploitation, oppression, and the dehumanization of individuals, the nuances in their historical contexts, purposes, legal frameworks, treatment, and legacies highlight the complexity of human bondage across continents. By examining these differences, we aim to shed light on the multifaceted nature of enslavement and its enduring consequences. Before we delve in, kindly hit the like button to support our work. Number 1. Slave status. The story of slavery is one of stark contrasts, where the experiences of individuals varied vastly depending on geographical location and historical context. In Africa, slavery sometimes took on a temporary nature, with shades of leniency, while in the New World of North and South America, it was a brutal, permanent, and systematic institution. Through examining specific examples enriched with dates, names, and locations, we can unravel the complexity of this historical dichotomy. In pre-colonial Africa, the institution of slavery often had nuances that distinguished it from the brutality seen elsewhere. Take the Kingdom of Dahomey, present-day Benin, in the 18th and 19th centuries, where prisoners of war were temporarily enslaved. For instance, in 1748, during the reign of King Tegbesu, prisoners captured in wars were enslaved, but often integrated into society after a certain period or traded for goods. Moreover, among the Yoruba people in Nigeria, slavery wasn't always lifelong. Individuals could ascend to freedom through various means, such as proving their loyalty through military service or marrying into the family of their captors. This system allowed for a degree of social mobility and integration, albeit within a hierarchical structure. Conversely, the New World slavery experience in North and South America was marked by unyielding brutality and permanence. The Barbados Slave Code of 1661 stands as a chilling testament to the systematic dehumanization of enslaved Africans, legally binding them to a lifetime of servitude and suffering. One touching example is the case of Solomon Northup, an African-American man born free in New York. In 1841, he was kidnapped and sold into slavery in Louisiana, where he endured unspeakable horrors on various plantations before regaining his freedom in 1853. His harrowing account, documented in 12 Years a Slave, sheds light on the inhumanity and ruthlessness of the American slavery system. The plantation economy of the southern United States thrived on the backs of enslaved laborers, subjected to relentless brutality and exploitation. For instance, on the Epps plantation in Louisiana, overseer Edwin Epps inflicted unimaginable cruelties on enslaved individuals like Solomon Northup, employing whipping, starvation, and other forms of punishment to maintain control and extract maximum labor. Number 2. Slave treatment. In the Americas, enslaved individuals were subjected to inhumane treatment, starting from the moment of capture to their backbreaking labor on plantations. For instance, on southern plantations in the United States, enslaved Africans endured backbreaking work under the scorching sun, often with meager rations and inadequate shelter. Frederick Douglass, an enslaved African American who later became an abolitionist, vividly recounted the brutal conditions he faced on Maryland plantations in his autobiographical narrative. Moreover, within the legal framework of slavery in the Americas, enslaved people faced tremendous obstacles to freedom, as demonstrated by laws such as the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Any attempts to escape bondage were met with severe repercussions, including brutal punishments or even death. The story of Harriet Tubman, a courageous abolitionist who led countless enslaved individuals to freedom via the Underground Railroad, exemplifies the extraordinary risks and sacrifices involved in seeking liberation from American slavery. In contrast, slavery in Africa often took on a different tone, with enslaved individuals sometimes experiencing relatively moderate treatment and possessing avenues for potential freedom. Among some African societies, slaves were integrated into households as domestic servants or workers, often treated as members of the family. For example, in the Oyo Empire of present-day Nigeria, slaves could rise to positions of authority and even attain freedom through acts of valor or loyalty to their masters. Additionally, the institution of slavery in Africa wasn't always permanent. In certain cases, enslaved individuals could negotiate their freedom through acts of bravery, repayment of debts, or fulfilling certain conditions set by their masters. This possibility of emancipation offered a glimmer of hope and agency to enslaved individuals, setting African slavery apart from the more rigid and oppressive systems prevalent in the Americas. Number 3. Slave racialization. The racialization of slavery represents a significant distinction between the Americas and the Old World, shaping the dynamics of power, oppression, and social hierarchies in each region. In the Americas, slavery became naturally linked to race, with white slave owners exerting control over black slaves. Conversely, in the Old World, the division between enslaved and free individuals often centered on factors like language, culture, or religion, rather than race. In the Americas, slavery became deeply entrenched within a system of racial hierarchy, wherein white Europeans and their descendants asserted dominance over black Africans and their descendants. This racialization of slavery was epitomized by the transatlantic slave trade, which forcibly transported millions of Africans to the Americas to toil on plantations and in other labor-intensive industries. The legal framework of slavery in the Americas codified racial distinctions, relegating black individuals to the status of chattel property owned by white slave owners. For example, in the antebellum South of the United States, laws known as Black Codes and later Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation and denied basic rights to African Americans, further solidifying the racialized nature of slavery and its aftermath. Additionally, the one-drop rule, which stipulated that any individual with even a single drop of African ancestry was considered black, underscored the widespread presence of racial categorization within American slavery. Conversely, in the Old World, particularly in regions like the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia, distinctions between enslaved and free individuals were often based on factors such as language, culture, or religion rather than race. For instance, during the Islamic Golden Age, the institution of slavery was widespread, but slaves came from diverse ethnic backgrounds and were not necessarily defined by their race. In the Ottoman Empire, slaves were acquired through various means, including warfare, trade, and tribute, with individuals from regions as diverse as Europe, Africa, and the Caucasus being integrated into the empire. While racial differences existed, they were not always the primary determinant of one's status as enslaved or free. Instead, factors like linguistic proficiency, skills, or social connections could influence an individual's position within Ottoman society. The racialization of slavery in the Americas and the more nuanced distinctions in the Old World highlight the diverse manifestations of human bondage throughout history. While slavery in the Americas became intrinsically tied to racial identity, with white slave owners dominating black slaves, the Old World saw enslaved and free individuals distinguished by factors such as language, culture, or religion. By exploring these distinct paradigms within their historical context, we gain a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics that shaped the institution of slavery across different regions. Number 4. Slave position. The commodification of enslaved individuals, reducing them to mere property, represents a dehumanizing aspect of slavery that was particularly pronounced in the Americas. Here, the legal framework and societal norms perpetuated the notion that enslaved people were akin to objects, with their status as property being inheritable. In the Americas, the legal system explicitly grouped the status of enslaved individuals as property, establishing a framework that facilitated their exploitation and oppression. Laws and statutes explicitly define enslaved people as chattels, akin to other forms of property such as livestock or land. This legal categorization not only legitimized the ownership of human beings, but also facilitated their sale, purchase, and inheritance as assets. For example, in the southern United States, the peculiar institution of slavery was upheld by a complex web of laws known as slave codes, which regulated every aspect of enslaved life and reinforced their status as property. These laws dictated that enslaved individuals were subject to the whims of their owners, who could buy, sell, or lease them at will, often tearing families apart in the process. One of the most insidious aspects of enslavement as property in the Americas was its inheritable status, whereby the children born to enslaved women inherited the enslaved status of their mothers. This meant that enslavement was not only a condition endured by individuals, but also a hereditary status passed down from one generation to the next. Consequently, enslaved families faced the perpetual threat of separation and exploitation, with children being born into bondage with no hope of emancipation. For instance, the principle of partus sequitur ventrem, derived from Roman law and adopted in many American colonies, stipulated that the status of a child followed that of its mother, regardless of the father's status. This meant that even if an enslaved woman bore a child fathered by a free man, the child would still be enslaved if the mother was enslaved. This legal doctrine reinforced the notion of enslaved individuals as property, perpetuating intergenerational bondage and denying enslaved families the possibility of freedom. In Africa, it was embedded within cultural and social frameworks that often allowed for greater agency and mobility compared to the dehumanizing chattel slavery experienced in the Americas. Instead of being treated solely as property, enslaved individuals in Africa were often integrated into society in various roles, such as laborers, servants, or even adopted members of the community. Their status as slaves could sometimes be temporary, with opportunities for manumission or integration into the family or community. Number 5. Slave labor. Slave labor in North and South America bore stark differences from its African counterpart, reflecting unique socioeconomic conditions and agricultural practices. In the Americas, the pace and intensity of slave labor were intricately tied to the demands of specific crops. For instance, sugar cultivation demanded grueling and relentless labor, particularly during the harvest season. Slaves toiled intensively on sugar plantations for 6 months, enduring backbreaking work under the scorching sun. In contrast, the cultivation of crops like tobacco afforded a slightly different labor experience, often allowing enslaved individuals to work alongside freemen, and at times experience less arduous conditions. In contrast to the Americas, African slavery often exhibited a different rhythm of labor, characterized by diverse economic activities and social structures. While some African societies engaged in agricultural production with enslaved labor, the pace and intensity of work were often moderated by communal practices and cultural norms. Additionally, African slaves sometimes had opportunities to negotiate their labor arrangements and earn their freedom through various means. Example: in pre-colonial West Africa, enslaved individuals contributed to agricultural production alongside free laborers, but were integrated into kinship networks and social structures. Their labor was often subject to communal oversight, and they could sometimes achieve freedom through acts of valor or service to their communities. Additionally, number 6, purposes. The purpose of slavery differed significantly between Africa and the Americas, reflecting distinct societal structures and economic imperatives. In African societies, slavery often served as a mechanism for social integration and the consolidation of power. Enslaved individuals were incorporated into kinship networks and communities, contributing to agricultural production, domestic labor, and military service. The institution of slavery facilitated alliances between different ethnic groups and reinforced hierarchies within society. Example: in pre-colonial kingdoms such as the Asante Empire in West Africa, slavery played a crucial role in bolstering the labor force and consolidating political authority. Enslaved individuals served as agricultural laborers, artisans, and soldiers, contributing to the wealth and military prowess of the empire. Slavery was intricately intertwined with the social fabric, with enslaved individuals often rising to positions of influence within the royal court. Conversely, slavery in the Americas was primarily driven by economic imperatives, with enslaved individuals viewed as commodities for wealth generation. Plantation owners in North and South America exploited enslaved labor to cultivate cash crops such as sugar, cotton, and tobacco, amassing vast fortunes in the process. The brutal exploitation of enslaved laborers was central to the economic prosperity of colonial and antebellum societies. Example: in the antebellum American South, slavery formed the backbone of the plantation economy, with enslaved individuals subjected to grueling labor in cotton fields, rice paddies, and tobacco plantations. The profitability of these enterprises relied on the uncompensated labor of enslaved people, who endured harsh conditions and brutal treatment to generate wealth for their masters. While slavery in Africa and the Americas shared certain similarities, such as the utilization of coerced labor, the underlying purposes differed significantly. In Africa, slavery functioned as a mechanism for social cohesion and political consolidation, whereas in the Americas, it served as a tool for economic exploitation and wealth accumulation. Example: in Africa, enslaved individuals often retained certain rights and privileges within society, including the possibility of upward mobility and integration into the community. In contrast, the chattel slavery system in the Americas reduced enslaved individuals to property, denying them basic human rights and subjecting them to brutal exploitation for the financial gain of their owners. In conclusion, exploring the multifaceted nature of slavery reveals the intricate dynamics that shape societies in Africa and the Americas. From the diverse purposes to the distinct labor systems, each aspect underscores the complexity of human history and its enduring legacy. As we navigate the complexities of history, it's crucial to acknowledge the impact of slavery on contemporary society. By confronting uncomfortable truths and engaging in meaningful dialogue, we can work towards a more just and equitable future. Together, let's honor the voices of those who have been silenced by history and amplify their stories for generations to come. Your support plays a vital role in spreading awareness and fostering understanding. Every like, share, and subscription helps to amplify these important narratives and ensure that they reach a wider audience. Join us in our mission to shed light on the complexities of slavery and empower individuals to confront the past while building a more inclusive future. Thank you for your support, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on our journey of discovery and enlightenment.